Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition to the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from the USA Today NFL Wire. My co-host is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, Arizona Cardinals site from SB Nation's family of sites, and also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. It's been a long podcasting night for Seth, is here on a Tuesday night since he recorded 2 straight shows, one with Justin on the draft show, and then he's now on tonight with this. But at least we get to talk about the Cardinals winning again. Seth, how does it feel to have a 2-0 Cardinals team for the second year in a row?
You know, it feels good. I know people sometimes look at a win like this and lament, things, but at the end of the day, as Cardinals fans, we've lamented enough losses where they had the chance to win it that I'll take a win that maybe they shouldn't have gotten, because you know what? Teams always need a little help, and we saw that quite a bit for other teams, and it's nice to get that for the Arizona Cardinals.
Right. They were fortunate. They played well. They made mistakes. Minnesota played well, but ultimately that kicking, and we're Cardinals fans, we can empathize with this based on what we saw from Zane Gonzalez last year. Critical kicks in big moments that can bite you, and even had he made the extra point that he missed early in the game, then it's not a do-or-die situation. They would be going to overtime instead, which, it wasn't just one missed kick, it was 2 missed kicks. But here we are in episode 325. We've got lots to talk about the Cardinals win. So this is how we'll do this show. We're going to start by we'll debate the fact. No one. Did the Cardinals win or did the Vikings lose it? And then we'll talk about, how we think of the Cardinals now and how we would have thought had they actually lost that game. We're going to look at the positives and negatives, and then we'll look ahead to what is a promising game for the Cardinals in Week 3 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So let's go ahead and get started, Seth. Let's throw it out there. This is a classic. This is a classic talking heads piece, like ESPN, those debate shows, probably on the radio they talked about this. Did the Cardinals win the game or did the Vikings lose it? What's your take on that?
I always put it from this way. The Cardinals were in a position to win the game and they won. And that's all you can ask from a team. Ideally they close out the game and it doesn't come down to that. Kyler, doesn't make a silly decision and run out of bounds on first down, forcing them to take a timeout. The offensive line blocks better on third down. All of that can be a factor in the game. And obviously we prefer that be the way they won. That being said, they put themselves in a position to win the game just as much as they put themselves in a position to lose the game. And they ended up winning the game, and that's realistically all you can ask. Did Minnesota make mistakes? Absolutely. But, one of the biggest plays of the game was the second Kyler Murray interception, where there was just, a blatant missed call on a, roughing the quarterback. And so when you look at it from that perspective, those things tend to even out over the course of a season. And in this case, it just evened out in a game where, maybe that old basketball saying, ball don't lie, just happened to work out.
Right. And, I'm going to be bad about this. I can't take one particular side of it. So The Cardinals did win the game because they played good enough to win. They also made mistakes. But the Vikings also lost the game. They played well enough to win, but they lost it because their kicker missed the kick. And again, we can empathize with that because we lost games because, Zane Gonzalez didn't either tie the game or win the game. And that happens when you don't have a consistent kicker. And so,
well, the other thing is, and this is something you and I have talked about before. We've talked about this personally and on the show. I always think coaches make a mistake when they settle for field goals. Even, there's a difference between getting yourself, like the Cardinals did at the end of the first half, getting yourself into a position with little to no time to kick a long field goal. It's a whole other thing when you basically run time off the clock and you're living or dying with the field goal itself. And I understand that they're professionals. They should make it. But there's a number of things that can go wrong in that instance. One of them did, and he missed the kick. And it is the kicker's fault. But at the same time, if you're aggressive and you get it down inside the 5 or score a touchdown, then you put yourself in a position where you don't have to worry about anything like that, especially when you're talking about a kicker that already missed a 33-yarder. I mean, at that point, you've got to be, as a coach, you've got to be cognizant of your team and what's going on. And again, I understand the argument that, well, they're professionals, they should make it. I agree. But, at the same time, we know that professionals mess up. We know that Tom Brady's thrown interceptions in clutch situations. I mean, these things happen. And, Greg Joseph is not the Tom Brady of kickers. So
No, but it's one of those catch-22s when you are as a coach, because you want to believe in the kicker you have on your roster to be able to put in this situation. And this is different, at least in my opinion. It's different than a mid 40-yard field goal, 50-yard field goal, because those are kind of toss-ups. A 37-yarder, 32-yarder, those should be, like, inside 40 should be automatic. Now, granted, you could always try and get a little closer because, even inside 30 yards. Guess what? That's even more automatic. It is rare that you get a miss on those. That said, the Cardinals put themselves in a position to lose that game because, there were blunders. And it was the case again, and Kyler Murray talked about it after the game, is they consistently, the issues they have tend to be self-inflicted as opposed to, at least this so far. It happened a lot last year. They're self-inflicted. The first touchdown by the Vikings when KJ Osborne busted free, it was a busted coverage. I don't know if Byron Murphy made the mistake or one of the safeties made the mistake, but that's something you can't have happen. You can't have a receiver running free down the sideline on the second play of the game. It doesn't work like that. You can't do that against a guy like Kirk Cousins. Say what you will about him. He's not a great quarterback, but he's a very good quarterback who has great moments. So you can't do that. You can't throw a pick six on the first possession in the second half. So I know Murray, like, that was a bad throw. He thought he was. That was the bad
100% on Murray.
That one was a bad throw. The fourth down, you can't rough the kicker on fourth down when you forced a punt. That's different than getting caught like against Tennessee when they got gotcha and they faked a punt and got the first down. But that's absolutely inexcusable to rough the punter when you've gotten a 3 and out, when you forced a punt like that in a game where you've been going back and forth.
Well, especially with how well your offense is playing. It's a lot different if you're in one of those games where it's, 7-3 and you're just trying to make a play to get your team an opportunity. But at that point, like, let your quarterback get the ball back and go put the game away.
Yeah.
And that's the difference in that penalty to me. And people will say, well, that doesn't make any sense. You want them to play aggressive. It's like, no, you can't have a stupid penalty there.
On special teams, you have to be smart. So,
well, and at that instance, I believe it was 4th and 7. So even like a running into the kicker doesn't matter. But like you can't get a personal foul that gives them a first down no matter what.
No.
And that's where you, like you said, you have to be smart. You have to use your head. And when Kyler is playing at the level he was in that game, just get him the ball back.
Right. And like the other mistake, that second interception, it sucks. That interception sucked, but that was just an unfortunate interception, because if he got the ball away quarter second earlier, okay, that's a touchdown. The only reason that was picked off is because he got hit/grabbed, and so he was not able to get the zip on the ball, because he was gonna zip that ball, and it was gonna be a catch, and it was gonna be a touchdown. He had the window there, but yeah, they sort of missed the striking the helmet penalty, which they should have gotten. Not that I think that should be a penalty, but it is a penalty. It's just that he didn't get rid of it quite quickly enough, and that's when you're like, damn. that's that situation. You don't get too angry about it, because that's a play. That is a touchdown right there, if it isn't unfortunate in this case. That said, I do think the Vikings lost that game more than the Cardinals won the game. They had great fight because they overcame things. They overcame turnovers. They overcame the fourth down penalty, the punt penalty, and those are things that are, average teams and bad teams don't overcome that. So Kyler had such a fantastic game that it balanced out. It balanced out the mistakes they made, and Minnesota. So to both the teams' credit, they both played well enough to win. It's just that the Vikings did lose it again, but that's how that works. Cardinals have lost games like that before, and so we'll take it. It's a W. You take it, no problem. Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's get more. It's about the game specifically. What went well? That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We are, we're a couple of weeks now into legal sports betting here in Arizona. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to check it out yet, but it makes watching sports even more fun, because you've got a little skin in the game, right? Just like when you watch football with your fantasy teams, you're more invested when you have something invested in it. That's what legal sports betting allows. You've got a little bit of cash on the line. The best way to get in the action, if you haven't started, is with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. And if you haven't started, so what they're doing to celebrate legal betting here in Arizona is they're giving you a $150 free bet just for signing up. Again, it's a $150 free bet just for signing up. It's not a deposit that they match. It's actually a free bet. We know DraftKings, with their experience as a leader in daily fantasy sports, and now have America's top-rated sportsbook app, DraftKings Sportsbook. You'll get promotions all the time. And so if you haven't yet, let's do this. Listeners, there's a deal for you. You get that free bet, $150. Download the top-rated DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use the code DRYHEAT when you sign up. If you sign up right now, you'll receive a $150 free bet. That's code DRYHEAT, and you get a $150 bet free instantly. Only at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. 21 plus. Arizona only. Free bet expires 7 days from date of issuance. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Subject to regulatory licensing requirements. We're back on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about now. Well, before we talk about the positives, that we got to skip that, is this. The Cardinals were in a situation last year. They were 2-0. We got our hopes up a lot, and then they brought us back down to earth. They're 2-0. Everyone's feeling great, especially with how the offense is humming. But Seth, How would you have felt about this team had they dropped that game? Would it have changed your optimism for the team moving forward?
Yeah, I think it just changes the idea of where they're at. A win at home over a good team, you look at it and you see a team that's obviously in the right direction, that's heading in the right direction, that is heading towards being a playoff team. A loss in that situation is the question that we have continued to ask: are they ready to take the next step? And I know when people think of it as like, well, it's just a missed field goal, but luck factors into a lot of situations, and sometimes that luck is on your side. And it seemed like that night, or that game, the luck was on their side. And like I said, sometimes it seems like the football gods, look at it and go, oh, okay, yeah, we got you. And that's kind of how this one feels. And so you, like you said, you take it and you go, because it's a win, and there's nothing else you can do, and you're not going to feel sorry about it. That's for sure.
Right. And so they get the win, and then you look at the good things, which we're talking about in a second, and you see a lot of positives. But a 2-0 team, and this is exactly the sort of game that they lost a couple of times last year. That loss to the Lions that was dumb. The loss to the Patriots was dumb. The loss to the Panthers was kind of dumb, although they never really had any chance in that game based on how Carolina controlled it. But, last year, we felt they were over the hump. And we talked about this a lot on the show last year, is that they were ahead of the curve. So they were ahead of schedule. They were supposed to be in the mix. By the end of the year, they were right on schedule with expectations. We expected them to be around a 500 team, a team that could make the playoffs, and ultimately they were 8-8 and barely missed the playoffs. But there were times at the beginning of the year they started 2-0, so you're like, okay, they're ready. They're better than we think. Then they come back down to earth, and they'd have a couple of games. You're like, oh, never mind. Then they got to 5-2 and 6-3. You're like, oh, well, this team isn't just a playoff team. This is a team that could compete in the playoffs. Then they end the season on their they kind of hit the skids, and they bring us back to earth. A loss would have really kind of put them behind the 8 ball, because that game, a home conference game, those are the games that they have to win, and ultimately those are the games that cost them, even with their losses at the end of the year, that cost them the playoffs anyway, because the reason why the Bears got in is due to the conference record and common opponent record that they had. When the Cardinals lost to Carolina and they lost to the Lions, it hurt their playoff chances. And so they didn't lose, they picked up the win, and so they're ahead of schedule again, or for what we're expecting, they're on schedule is to start the year. You could say they sneaked a win in week 1. Week 2, they needed to win. And so now they're a little bit ahead of what people probably expected. This is where we hoped they would be. Had they lost, we would have questions. They would be right where many would expected them at 1-1. But because of the loss at home, you'd be questioning. The doubt would start to come in to see whether or not they're better than they were last year. And that's the thing that entering this season, that the Cardinals fans are starting to, they doubt that Murray is the guy. They doubt that Cliff Kingsbury is the coach that can take them there. And coming away with a win like this, I'm not saying that we've seen hot starts in fall, like 2012, the first year I covered the team as media. That was something special, those first 4 games, and then it just went to poop. I don't think that's going to happen. We've seen hot starts. But being 2-0, it keeps them on track. It keeps the interest and intrigue high. 1-1, there would be doubts. Right now, there's some concerns with how they play, but there's not concerns about their being competitive.
Yeah, and that's one of the questions we have is, and I think that was a big question coming out of last year, is can they finish? And this was a game where
They almost didn't finish.
Yeah,
Oh boy.
and so that's the thing, is that's still going to be a question. Can they finish games? Can they find a way when they do have when they when they are the team with the chance to close it out? Can they finish that game? And the reason that stemmed from that question is because they couldn't finish the season last year, right? And
Right.
they just needed one win, and they again crapped the bed. And so you look at it from that perspective, that's still going to be a question for them. And I think it's fair right now to continue to ask that question because, like you said, there's a legitimate debate on whether or not they won that game or if the Vikings lost it. And I think in 5 or 6 weeks we'll be able to tell what it was, because if they're 4-1 or 5-1 versus 2-4 or 3-3, then I think we'll know whether or not they lost that game and or the Vikings lost that game and they just got away with one.
Yeah. If I wanted to put this kind of across of a spectrum, I think at 2-0 now, Cardinals fans are legitimately excited. Mild doubts, excited. If they had lost in Tennessee a competitive game and beaten the Vikings at home, they would be hopeful. Okay, that would kind of meets expectations. They blow out the Titans like they did, and they lose to the Vikings. They're now disappointed. Obviously 0-2, and then the sky would be falling, and people would already be calling for Cliff Kingsbury's firing. Which, let's be clear, that's not happening in season. Very likely, that's just not going to happen. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about that. So a win does make things all better especially because there were so many good things. There weren't everything good. Everything was good against Tennessee. Not everything was good, but there were enough good things. So it wasn't a fluky win. It was just a fortunate win.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair way to look at it and a fair way to kind of move forward until we figure out whether or not how good of a team they are.
And you said it, we were talking off the air, week 3 is critical. We're going to preview that game later on the show, but we now look ahead to this Jaguars game, and this is at least the early measuring stick as to, is this Cardinals team different? Because now granted, Jaguars are worse than the Panthers were last year in terms of talent level. That said, this is the Jaguar. This is the Panthers game for last year. So if they go out there and they take care of business, as you say, so they don't have to put up 40. It doesn't have to be 40-6. But if they control the game from start to finish, or they blow them out and then they score a couple of garbage time touchdowns because they're then everyone thinks, okay, this is a good team. And then we look at that Rams game as the big measuring stick. If they struggle to a win, I think we're going back to the concern part, right?
Yeah, and God forbid it's a loss, then I don't know what we're going to do with this fan club, because you can't be the first team to lose to this
right.
this
you
iteration.
Can't lose to Urban Meyer and Trevor Lawrence. You can't be the first. You can't be a legitimate contender and have that happen. So yeah, if it's a close win, then you question the 3-0, and if those have been following the Cardinals long enough, you think back to 2012, the 4-0 start, where you're like, oh, this could be a special year. Boom, 11 have lost the next 11 out of 12 games. I'm not saying it would look like that, but that's what comes to mind when you struggle against the team that is struggling right now. And legitimately struggling. Think about the Cardinals in 2019. They started off struggling. New head coach, rookie quarterback. If you're a good team, you should take care of that business without really any trouble. The Cardinals are far more talented than the Jaguars and that should be evident when they play on Sunday.
Yeah, and that's kind of what you want to see, right? You want to see them that it is evident, that there's no question, that there's no debate on that the Cardinals are the superior team. And it's one of those situations where we've said before, this is more than anything where the Cardinals have struggles, probably the wrong word, but where they have, lacked taking that next step in being a team that goes in and wins a game convincingly in this manner. And so when you look at it from that perspective, I think you look at it and say, they don't have to win, like you said, 40 to 6. That doesn't need to be the score. But if they go out and they win 28 to 13, and it's
not competitive,
right, and it's
that's one of those games. So if they get to a 17-0 lead, and then they can run the ball to grind so you get 75 yards from Chase Edmonds and 120 from James Conner, you have no problem with that.
Correct. And so that's, kind of how you look at it. And if that's how it ends up, that's kind of the expectation. Would you not agree with that take, that you're expecting to be that good of a team that just is able to coast kind of in the second half? And like you said, maybe it gets a little closer and you go, oh shoot, we should have. But
right. But it should be one of two things. You coast to the end, or they make some stupid things. They do some stupid things early, but then you lap them at the end where you pour it on. If you want to look at that, how the Green Bay Packers handled the Lions, where
exactly, that's a great, or even the way the Buccaneers beat the Falcons.
Oh yeah,
where they came back into it, and you go, oh no, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh wait, yeah, never mind.
Then Josh Rosen is playing.
Yeah. So yeah, when you look at it from that perspective, I would agree with you, and that's what you're expecting, and if they are a good team and that's who they are, I think we expect to see that, and to on next Tuesday to be talking about a 3-0 team that's in a good spot heading into a pivotal first game within the division.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the SR Cardinals Talk the Web. Let's go back to that game and talk about all the good stuff, because there was lots of it. That's coming next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals Talk on the web. There were plenty of things to be happy about. Many good things that happened. I think number one, take away the two interceptions, but you look at the play of Kyler Murray, and you can see that through 2 games, he is playing at another level. 400 yards passing, another 3 touchdown passes, and another rushing touchdown. So he's got 7 touchdown passes in 2 games, 2 rushing touchdowns, given 9 total touchdowns. That's the most in the NFL, total touchdowns. And he has the offense just absolutely humming. They scored over 30 points and had over 400 yards in both games. And Kyler Murray is, you look at him and you look around the league, the way we're talking about them. He keeps this up. Like, he right now looks like an MVP candidate right now, and that's just after 2 games. I know it's early, but this is what we wanted to see from Murray early on, and he's doing it. And so once again, what we're seeing from Kyler Murray, he is meeting and or exceeding expectations at every corner.
Yeah, and he's getting to the point where he's the guy, and we've known this, but he's getting to the point where he's the guy that makes the difference in the game. And when he plays at such a high level, like he did for much of the game, you don't want to go as far as saying they're unbeatable, but man, they look really close to it.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. We're at not, we'll talk about that. The defense, if they look as relatively good as week 1, it was not the same in week 2. But if that defense looks decent and the offense is playing like that, we're okay. super fan guy, super optimistic homer, but that sort of consistency, that's what you get from your teams like the Chiefs and the Ravens and the Bills and the Buccaneers, all of whom are legitimate Super Bowl contenders.
Yeah, and that's what the expectation is. If you're able to combine those two situations and you're able to combine those two games, then I think you're looking at it as, hey, we're one of the best teams in the NFL. The thing is, they have to combine that at a consistent rate. And if they're unable to do that, then that, I'm not going to say that takes away from who they are, but it calls into the question of if they are a team that you can really count on night in and night out. That being said, the level that Kyler Murray's playing at right now, I don't know if it matters. Because if he's playing at that level, he's entering into slightly that conversation of guys that just keeps their teams afloat. I mean, we saw it with Aaron Rodgers. We've seen it with Patrick Mahomes. And he's entering, and obviously we've seen it for years with Russell Wilson. Those guys and their abilities, I think if he's starting to enter that realm, that's, going to make him and the Cardinals even more of contenders moving forward.
Right, and Kyler Murray was just the starting point because there were other things. And even with the struggles they had defensively, we'll talk about that in the next segment, something that you really liked to see, they held Minnesota, who was offense. We'll go with this. They have a very good offense. They did last year. They do this year. They held them to 2 of 10 on third down. And that's the money down. And that's, Vance Joseph preaches that. You get off the field on third down, you're going to do good things. They didn't do as well in the red zone that they would have, they held them. They scored every time they got into the red zone, except for the last play of the game. But even defensively, there were things to like, and especially adjustments, because after they got gashed by Dalvin Cook early, they made adjustments and were much better in the second half defensively. But going back to the offensive side of the ball, you also got some really good receiver play. Rondale Moore. Wow. I'm not even going to say so. The wide open, that's probably the easiest touchdown anyone would get. But it seemed like every time Rondale Moore touched the ball, he embarrassed somebody.
Well, and it's one of those situations when you watch him, and it's something that we've talked about before. He's a different type of player. And what I mean by that is his physicality is akin to a running back. And I said this back when they drafted him, and I'm not sure if people completely understood what I meant. But the way he plays reminded me a lot of Anquan Boldin. He's just a much faster version. Like he's a souped up version. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to have the borderline Hall of Fame career that Anquan had. But the way that he plays and the way that he dictates physicality is very unique for a player of his stature. And so he plays, more akin to a running back. And when you look at it from that perspective, you see the overall potential to be special in that.
He becomes a player that defenses fear. Even on the 4-yard outs, he gets feared, which, when a defense fears him, he's not like afraid. It's not the same type of afraid as Derrick Henry. He's going to embarrass, he's going to shove you to the ground. This is a different, he's going to, like Kyler Murray does sometimes on his runs. He just makes people look bad in space. on that halftime, on that right before halftime when they just had a few seconds left, he got out of bounds on the one time. Bashaud Breeland, he throws it, injures his back trying to get him, and then he's upset because he didn't actually tackle him. Then just a play later, he goes for 18 yards on a play that normally goes for 6 and out of bounds. He shakes a guy, he shakes another guy, he gets up the field and is heady enough to get out of bounds. But it was almost literally every time he touched the ball, he embarrassed somebody in some way, and that gets into defenders' heads because defenders don't want to be embarrassed. In the case of the touchdown, he was wide open. That should never happen. And so whether or not, like Aqib Talib said, that was Patrick Peterson's zone, his side of the field, his depth of the field. He claimed, like he said on his podcast, that his job was to stay on DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, but that's a really easy way to, like, he was guarding Hopkins, but there was no one behind him, and so he was left not being embarrassed because he was covering their best receiver, all the while leaving their most electric receiver wide open down the field, that was such a fun. But yeah, Rondale Moore, everyone's starting to catch up on him, but it's gonna be really hard to keep him off the field if he continues to make plays at the rate that he's doing.
Yeah, and that's what you want, right? Like, that's what you want from your draft picks, and you want it to be difficult to leave him out of the lineup consistently. And when you can't do that, it's a good thing. And so he's basically splitting time, and I know they're on the field together, but he's basically splitting time right now with Christian Kirk, and I think it's making them both better.
Right? Christian he's been fantastic so far this year. He didn't have as many catches, but his catches are critical, and the degree of difficulty this year has gone up on his catches.
Yeah, and the timing of them has seemed to be of utmost importance, and that was something that we couldn't always say, earlier in his career, and that he was, making timely plays, and now it's one of the things that has been the best thing about him is that he's making catches at an incredibly timely manner that is, changing the outcome of the game.
Right. You have to like the game that Max Williams had 6 yards away of being the first Cardinals tight end to hit 100 yards since Rob Awalt in 1989. Now, granted, 34 of those came on one of the flukiest plays you ever see, where it was deflected by 2 defenders and it landed in his hands, and he runs with it. I was actually super, super pleased with how they utilized Max Williams in the game plan. They lined him out wide. They had the tight ends dump off, like kind of a screenplay. It was all super effective. And then on top of that, like the other thing you say is, what a difference. Now, granted, Matt Prater missed the 1 field goal last week in the meeting. Like, the only thing it was a meaningless field goal, except for those who bet the over. We talked about that last week, but he hit the game winner. It ended up being the game-winning kick, but what was even, like, every single point that once Rondale Moore got it, that he nailed the 62-yard field goal. Okay, we saw Zane Gonzalez hit one for 57 last year, right before halftime in week 1. But come on, 62 yards. This guy, this is exactly what you want from him. It was a critical clutch kick. That was a high degree of difficulty, and he nails it. And, you don't want to have to worry about... So you want it to be a situation when your kicker comes on, you don't wonder, is he going to make it? You should be like, what? He didn't make it. And that should only be on the longest field goals.
Right. And when he made that, like you said, it almost seemed like it immediately change the way you perceive the game was headed, because you're like, oh, this is different. Because as you said, a couple of the things, one, the way that they got there,
Yeah.
and the way that Rondell Moore put them in a position. And I mean, that took basically no time. And
Right.
it
It
was
was,
like
what did he get the ball with 20? Let me see. I think it was
16 seconds left. And yeah, to just, I mean, two plays and you're in field goal range is different. And it creates situations where something like that is possible when, before it probably wasn't, and you didn't even think about it.
Yeah, it was incredible.
I
Anything.
mean, I mean, let's just real quick. Let's be honest. If they don't have Matt Prater, they probably take a knee and just go in.
Yep. Which made, which would have made things much more interesting, especially because then that the pick six we're going to talk about here in a couple minutes on the negatives. But yeah, it changed the course of the game essentially, because they went into halftime with a lead instead of having to come out and play catch up. And so, offensively, you liked to see what you saw from. You really kind of liked everything that you saw offensively, with the exception of, we'll talk about in the negatives. You got some plays from all your playmakers, and you got improved defense in the second half, and you're starting to see that, Cliff Kingsbury maybe isn't the bum that we thought he was, because now he's got the talent he needs to put together that offense and have it finally humming the way his offenses have always hummed.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that you and I have kind of preached and said over the last couple weeks, is that heading into the season, this was going to be a telling sign for him. And so far, it feels like he's passing with flying colors. Now, that doesn't mean, let's erect a statue or anything. But at the same time, I think we need to put the pitchforks away and allow him, the grace of the guy that's improved every season in his first two. And if you do that, I think you get a better idea of who he is and what he can be, because you're looking at him with fresh eyes, as opposed to, well, this is the guy that screwed it up last year. And so instead you start to look at it and go, okay, maybe this is a guy that can lead this team and be somebody that's, good enough to lead this team into the future. I'm not saying he is, and I don't think you're saying that, but I think he's earned the right to prove it one way or the other.
Thus far, he's not the problem.
Correct. And that's one of the things I think was from the beginning that we had to figure out, because that was something that people thought that, oh, he's the problem. And right now, he is not.
No, definitely not. Coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web, we will move to the things, the downsides. We've been all happy and roses and all this stuff because the Cardinals 2-0, but not everything went well. Let's talk about that. That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. There were a number of things that will be of concern, some negatives to the game. And piggybacking on what we were talking about, Cliff Kingsbury, the first thing that you look at that's staring you in the eyes is the fact that they did not execute in the late game when they had a chance to put the game away and ice the game and run the clock down. Now, I will say this. I'm not necessarily upset at Cliff Kingsbury for the philosophy, which was they were trying to be aggressive. And I can understand. We saw that from Bruce Arians. How many times did Bruce Arians, in a situation where he should run down the clock, he, instead of trying to do that, tries to make plays, and either adds an extra touchdown to give breathing room or gets the extra first down. However, when that leads to game management. We had questions about game management last year. I get, especially with the way the offense is going to, hey, let's go for another. We've been successful all game moving the ball. Let's do it again. But the problem was, and this is where the good and the bad, there's absolutely no reason for Kyler to run out of bounds in that first situation, because obviously they did not gain hardly anything in terms of yardage, and there was no plus. Minnesota didn't have to burn a timeout, and that was just, of all things, that play was the dumb one. And for as much props as we give Kyler Murray, that could have been a critical mistake.
Yeah, that was a silly play, and that's one of those where you look at it and you just hope he starts to understand the situations in that perspective, because that was, one of those situations where if he just takes an overview of it, you're able to more carefully see that that's not the play that needs to be made there.
And then it was followed up by, so when the first play kind of was busted and you didn't gain on anything and you stopped the clock, I do question the decision to drop back and pass. So what I think that, I know they were trying to be aggressive, but then you compound that by having him get sacked, which allowed them to use their timeout then, and you've lost yards. You pick a running play, and I was surprised when they came out with Edmonds on the field. So in terms of gamesmanship, if I were going to be aggressive still, that was my philosophy, I still would have put out the personnel package that looks like run the clock down. You've got Big, you've got James Conner in the backfield, but then you call a pass play that's a high percentage pass play. If you're watching the ESPN alternate feed with Peyton Manning, he called it a scheme play. So it wasn't a talent play, it was a scheme play. You scheme something so you get some yards, or you get 4 or 5 yards, or even another first down, and it keeps the clock running. I would have done that, but besides the point. On second down, they should have run the ball or schemed something that would have allowed them to move forward instead of backward, and so you don't end up with a third and long scenario. Now, granted, Danielle Hunter, he gave those tackles fits. I wouldn't say that Humphreys and Beachum and Murray were bad, but Danielle Hunter was really good, and with reason. He is as talented and productive a pass rusher as Chandler Jones. He's had 14.5 sacks each of the last 2 years.
Yeah, and when you look at it from that perspective, it was frustrating to see them finish up the way they did. And you want to see them make better decisions to get towards the end of the game, like we talked about. And then you want to see them execute better and put themselves in a position to win or finish a game.
Right. In this case, the way it ended, they deserved to lose. Because they couldn't have been, they had a scenario to close the game out, and they didn't. So they put themselves in a position to lose the game as a result.
Right. And so that's the thing you don't want to see, is them put themselves in a position to lose the game. And that's where, they were at, because they couldn't execute at the end. And that's just unfortunate.
Yeah. On the offensive side of the ball, obviously the turnovers. So the turnovers were bad. So you can't have a pick six. You can't let the defense score. So that's just never acceptable. Especially, it's not like he got blindsided. He saw Nick Vigil. He threw the ball anyway because he thought he had it far enough outside to avoid him. That can't happen. The other interception, I can't remember if we talked about this on or off the air, But the second interception you could live with because there was a play to be made, and it was an unfortunate interception instead of a bad interception because he got hit, and the truth is they probably should have gotten a roughing the passer because of the forcible strike to the helmet.
Yeah, and that's, again, that was just a unfortunate situation. And like I said, sometimes it plays out in a way that, you overcome that and it ends up just being a win. And that's how I look at it, is that while they didn't play the end of the game particularly well, they did get away with it in the same way that Minnesota got away with something. And to me, that evens out. And that's how sports typically works.
That's true. Defensively, I didn't expect them to be as dominant against Tennessee as they were. That said, I expected the defense to be much better than it was, because especially in the game, that first touchdown pass, that was inexcusable. But the way they defended, the way that Dalvin Cook had his way with them in the first half, like after what they did to Derrick Henry, I don't understand what happened.
Yeah, and that was an odd thing. It was almost like they were too geeked up to defend the pass, but they didn't even do that particularly well in the first half.
Nope. And as a result, because of the success that Minnesota had with running the ball, their pass rush never got home. So Chandler Jones didn't have a bad game. He was right there. But that's what happens when the running game is going, is that it doesn't allow, when you have passing downs, for the pass rush to get home and actually get the quarterback on the ground.
Well, it didn't even feel like they had a ton of passing downs, if we're being completely honest. I mean, they threw the ball a lot, but it didn't feel like they were able to pin their ears back and rush the passer, because they were always in a position where you felt like they could run for a first down. So to your point, like, they never just felt like, oh yeah, go get the quarterback.
Yeah, in terms of and their pass defense wasn't bad. The Osborne play at the beginning made it look much worse than it was. Cousins threw 244 yards, but 64 of those came on one play alone. You take that out, and you've got 180 passing yards. And so you look at, okay, that's fine. They didn't create the turnovers, but what killed them was the fact that Cook kept moving the chains.
Well, and we talked about it off the air. I thought there was some deployment errors this week after Vance Joseph had such a good week last week. I thought there were some deployment errors. We talked about it a little bit last week. And right now, we're just not fans of Isaiah Simmons being on the edge. And he was used on the edge quite a bit, just as a pure edge player opposite Chandler Jones.
And it must have happened mostly in the first half, because I swear in the first half, Zaven Collins played more. I don't have the snap count, so it just felt that way because I'd see Isaiah leaving the field. And, that might have been a contributing factor to the run defense, because instead of having Isaiah in space, and you have him trying to set the edge instead of Marcus Golden or Devon Kennard, who didn't play a ton, but he's a good guy off the bench. I questioned, their defensive line rotation after talking about how they want to rest J.J. Watt. He played 90% of the snaps, and Lucky Fotu played 3 snaps. I don't know. The way they used them after week 1, it didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it was like opposite of what we talked about and how much we praised them in week 1. Obviously Marco Wilson had an ankle. Again, nothing you can do about that. Hopefully he's back. Well, let's flip that. Hopefully they don't need him this week. And he's ready for LA, because That's the one thing. Ankles, hamstrings, those lower body twinges can, really, really weigh on you.
Oh, definitely, they totally can. Anything else of note that you take away
I
that
mean,
you
I
feel
think
like that was a
I thought
negative?
the two biggest things were that they just were beat up on both sides of the ball along the line after what we felt like was a dominant performance on both sides of the ball along the line.
That's true. The
And
pass
so,
rush, the defensive front for Minnesota was strong. Their offensive line the fact that they were able to run the ball, and I wonder with the issue in the running game, I wonder if it's because of scheme. Minnesota and Tennessee are built, in terms of talent the same way, but their offensive schemes are a little bit different. Vance Joseph talked about it. So Minnesota's run game is a stretch run, so you have to be a lot more disciplined. And Tennessee runs a lot of power downhill type running. And on stretch plays, if you go back to the Peyton Manning days, that was like what Edgerrin James did. Is so you stretch the field to the side until something opens, and then you hit that gap. And they weren't as good against that as they were against the physical downhill stuff that Tennessee did.
right. And that, I thought that really made a difference in the game. Other than that, Robert Alford is definitely their third cornerback. I don't think there's a question on it now after we saw the difference in just athleticism from Wilson to Alford. And Alford may have the old man ability of knowing where to be and when to be there, but when he's going up against these athletic young guys like Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen, he just doesn't have the juice anymore.
Well, and you
so
could tell that he was
not
compensating with giving them space.
right, and that's what I was going to say. He's not getting burned, but he was giving up chunks as opposed to last week what we saw from
Wilson and Murphy, where they were knocking the ball out.
Right, where they were playing physical and at the point of attack because they've got that makeup speed.
Coming next on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web is, and well, let's talk about the Jags game. So let's preview that. That's coming next on Rise of C-Red. You're back on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals have week 3. They are on the road for another East Coast early time slot game, but it is against the winless Jacksonville Jaguars. Seth, is there anything that the Jaguars do well right now?
I mean, no. And that's the scary thing to me more than anything else is this is a game where you just feel like it's obvious who the better team is. Trevor Lawrence looks like a rookie right now. He's thrown 5 interceptions so far on the season in 2 games. They are struggling with injury. I believe they're going to make another change along the offensive line because of injury. They're not able to run the ball consistently right now.
Oh, losing Travis Etienne in the preseason, that was brutal.
Yeah, they're giving up, a gaggle of points. It's just it feels like one of those games where there's not a question that the Cardinals are the better team. And let's be honest, as Cardinals fans, that's terrifying.
Right? It's like, when are they going to get let down? Well, especially, it's true. This is a team that's like they're going to be at home. They don't want to go 0-3. So you're probably going to get some fight out of him. Urban Meyer, he's used to winning games. And honestly, so is Trevor Lawrence. So it's gonna come together at that point. But like we said before, if this team's supposed to be good, if the Cardinals are expecting to be a good team, they can't be the first team to lose to the Urban Meyer and Trevor Lawrence Jaguars. They're going to get better, but they aren't nearly as talented. They don't do as well offensively yet. Their receiving core is not, scary. The James Robinson was really good last year. The running game, it hasn't done anything yet. And then defensively, there's nothing that they do that's really good. And their pass defense right now is not good. And the way Kyler Murray is cooking right now, he should have another 300-yard game before it turns into a run game where then they turn it into a 150-yard rushing game after he's thrown for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, and you look at it, I mean, I don't think they forced any turnovers all season. They have given up just shy of 900 yards in 2 games. Just shy of 850 yards in 2 games.
James Robinson leads the team in rushing with 72 in 2 games.
Yeah, I mean, they have 151 yards rushing in 2 games. The last game, they had total yards of 189. They're just, I mean, right now they're just not a good team.
Their opponents are averaging 9.2 yards per passing attempt.
Yeah, and their opponents are averaging 6 yards per play on offense. When you look at it, though, I will say the one thing that they have seemingly done well so far is Trevor Lawrence has only been sacked 2 times on the season, so that's not bad. But right now he's a scattershot rookie quarterback. They don't have a ton of receiving talent. DJ Chark is good. Marvin Jones is their top guy though right now with 11 receptions.
He's a talented player, but he's never been better than a reliable 2.
Right. If he's your 2, you're an okay team. If he's your 3, you're in a really good spot. And if he's your 1,
you're probably not very good.
Yeah. So let's put it this way: there's no reason the Cardinals should lose this game, but we're Cardinal fans. We don't ever expect to.
We're not used to that much fortune.
Correct. So, I still think they win. I think the Cardinals come out and they start off hot. I think they start off more focused, and that's something that they need to do this week. I thought they were unfocused early this last week, and it really showed. And then it made the game closer than it needed to be.
Absolutely is the case.
And so I think they come out. I think they win this game 35-21.
That's kind of what I said. I was on a Jaguars podcast Tuesday afternoon, and that's kind of what I said. I think they're going to be. I think it's going to be. They're going to be in a situation where they're like 34-13, and then they give up some points. So like 34-20. 34-21 in that, but it really won't be even that close because it was a garbage time touchdown when the Cardinals pulled all the starters and they were playing quarters just to get through the game, tackle them in the field of play. There's no reason that against this defense, this offense should score another 30 or more points, unless it's just they should score 28 points or more. And then grind out. They should be able to run the ball successfully. The pass defense of the Jaguars is not good. I think this is the game where we probably get to see DeAndre Hopkins have his big game. He's been productive but quiet because they've been moving the ball around. I think this is the DeAndre Hopkins game that they're going to feed him a lot, and it'll show. And we're gonna be talking about the team that's 3-0. With its first real measuring stick. So they had their measuring stick in week 1, but it's week 1. Week 1's weird. So, and their win actually looks from over the Titans looks much better now that they Tennessee went into Seattle and won in overtime, and Derrick Henry, he got out all of the aggression that he couldn't do against the Cardinals, and did it against the Seahawks with his 3 touchdowns and over 170 yards on the ground. He was a monster, an absolute monster. So that was their first measuring stick, but that's game 1, which is always weird. They sneaked away with a win in week 2. In week 3, they should win in convincing fashion. And then you get the real measuring stick against the Rams on the road. And then the 49ers at home for the next 2 weeks. So while we should come out of this game confident about what the type of team they are, and then going into division play for the next 2 weeks and hoping that they win one of those 2 games.
Yeah, and right now they're in a good spot. They're second in the NFL in points, 14th in points against. I expect that number to be in second in the NFL in points, or top 5 in points, and I expect them to be back in the top 10 of points allowed after this week. That should be kind of the expectation, and if that happens, then they are in a good spot and trending in the right direction.
Absolutely. And with that, we will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals Talk, episode 325. We will return next week. We better be talking about a 3-0 team. That's what we're saying. Or there's going to be panic, there's going to be hate. But no, it's not going to happen. The Cardinals are going to win handily this weekend, take care of business, and we'll be looking forward to a big Week 4 matchup. So that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. We'll be back again next week. Thanks again for listening, as always.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up, Sea Red.